All right, so today we're going to learn about ancient and classical China. So we're going to focus on the Zhou, Qin, and Han dynasties. So along with the impact of Confucianism and Daoism on Chinese civilization. So as we move through this PowerPoint presentation, pay very close attention to how geography, government, religion, and technology all really help shape China into one of the most influential civilizations to date. So our goal today is to explain how Chinese civilizations really developed under the Zhou, Qin, and Han dynasties and understand the impact of Confucianism on Chinese society. So before we discuss dynasties, let's talk about geography. So Chinese civilizations developed primarily between the Yellow River and the Yangtze River. So these rivers provided fertile soil for farming and allowed large populations to develop. So remember, it's a common thing you've been seeing throughout this unit. Mesopotamia, Egypt, and even India all developed along rivers, which provided good water for agricultural purposes, and they were able to grow a civilization because of it. So, due to them being by rivers, a lot of the Chinese civilizations really spend a lot of their time really trying to find ways to control flooding that happen due to these rivers and controlling the rivers themselves. So before we discuss the major dynasties that are in our standard, we need to understand the Shang dynasty because the Shang dynasty laid the foundation for other future Chinese dynasties later on. So the Shang dynasty is considered China's first documented dynasty, and it was centered around the Yellow River, and it was ruled by kings. So the Shang dynasty developed many features that we're going to see throughout other dynasties later on in this presentation. So some of those features included a hereditary monarchy. So a hereditary monarchy is basically like if my granddaddy was the king, when he died, I would be king next, and if I had a son, he would be king after I die, and it goes, keeps going. They also had a very organized government in Shang China. Their economy was based on agriculture. They were very advanced in bronze technology. They had a very complex writing system, so same as the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians. And they had an irrigation system, and they had a very good flood control system. The Shang people also practiced ancestor worship, so they believed that deceased family members could influence life on Earth and communicate with the heavens. So, one of the most important concepts in all of Chinese history is the mandate of heaven. So, the Zhou dynasty introduced this idea to justify taking over the Shang dynasty. So, the Shang now out of commission, and now the Zhou dynasty took it over, and now they're their own dynasty. So, the mandate of heaven is taught that a ruler receives authority from heaven because of good character and moral behavior, but it was conditional. So, if a ruler became corrupt, cruel, or ineffective, heaven could remove its support. And some of the signs that heaven kind of removed the support of the ruler were floods happening, famine happening, plagues happening, natural disasters, and even rebellions. So this concept really helped explain why a lot of these dynasties in Chinese history rose and fell. Now, around 500 BCE, China experienced a lot of political instability and a lot of social unrest in the kingdoms or dynasties. So people began to search for new ideas about how society should function. So one of the most influential thinkers during this period was Confucius. So Confucius believed society worked best when people actually acted morally and fulfilled their obligation or sorry responsibilities to each other. So Confucius really emphasized respecting each other, a good education foundation, good behavior, strong leadership, and even responsibility. So, unlike many religious leaders, Confucius really focused on how people work ethically and not so much supernatural beliefs. So, his teaching really became the foundation of the Chinese government and education system on down the line. So, when comes to Confucius' impact, Confucianism, shaped nearly every part of Chinese society. So, Confucius taught that a strong relationship creates strong societies. So he was really especially hard, or not hard, but emphasize these five relationships. So, ruler to subject, parent to child, husband and wife, older and younger siblings, and even friends. So, one of the most important concepts to remember is piety. So, piety means you're showing respect and loyalty and obedience towards your parents and ancestors. So Confucianism also really promoted education because Confucius believed individuals should earn positions based on what they know and not who their people are. So that's that hierarchy we talked about a minute ago. So this idea later influenced China's a test they had in government called a civil service exam, which we'll talk about later on. Now, Confucian teachings also influenced family structure and gender roles. So society really emphasized order, responsibility, and they had clear roles for what you were in your family. So, although Confucius doesn't really stress morality to everybody, Chinese societies really remain largely men heavy, or AKA patriarchal, and a lot of the men in these Confucian societies really held positions of power, mainly. So, another important philosophy that emerged around the time was Taoism, so sometimes called Taoism. So Taoism was associated with a thinker called Lao Tzu, and that's the name of the second bullet right there. So while Confucianism focused on rules and social order, Taoism really emphasized living in harmony and being one with nature. So Taoists believe people should avoid conflict if possible and just go with the flow of life. So a major concept that's associated with Taoism, and I'm sure y'all are familiar with this, is yin and yang. So yin and yang really represent balance between opposite forces. So some examples of yin and yang would be like light and dark, male and female, sun and moon, active and passive forces. So again, like that balance between two opposites. So the idea is that harmony comes from balance and not conflict. So after centuries of conflict during the warring states period, so this is when states or empires were warring with each other. One empire became victorious, and that was the Qin dynasty. So it was led by Emperor Qin. So the Qin dynasty conquered a lot of those rival kingdoms that were at war with each other, and it really unified China for the first time in 221 BC. So this was a turning point because China became a single empire under one ruler under the Qin dynasty. Now, the Qin dynasty was built on a philosophy called legalism. So legalists really believed that people were naturally selfish and they needed like strict laws to really pretty much govern themselves and harsh punishment to really maintain order. So the Qin made a lot of changes to the Chinese dynasty system. So they had a standardized writing system, they had a standardized money system, they built roads, and they even expanded the Great Wall of China, which you see in the picture right here. So these reforms really helped unify China, and it also improved trade and communication. Oh, excuse me. Now, although the Queen accomplished a lot of things, they were extremely harsh in how they ruled people. So they imposed heavy taxes, they forced a lot of their citizens into labor, and their punishments for crimes were very severe, excuse me. And many people were unhappy. So after Emperor Qin died, a lot of rebellions started to take place in the empire. So in about 206 BCE, the Qin dynasty collapsed after about 15 years of being in power. Now, the Han dynasty replaced the Qin dynasty, and it became one of China's greatest dynasties. So many historians really consider the Han dynasty a golden age of ancient China. So the Han really kept a lot of the Qin dynasty's government system, but legally and their legal practices were a lot more softer than they were in Qin dynasty. So a lot of the major achievements in Han Dynasty time period were, they invented the paper, they improved iron tools, they were big in astronomy and medicine, and they made a lot of agricultural advancements. Now, the Han Dynasty also expanded trade through the Silk Road, and the Silk Road was like a big pathway where a lot of countries would come together and trade with one another. So it connected China to Central Asia, the Middle East, and even Europe. So along that route, they would trade like goods, silk, religion, ideas, technologies. So this really helped spread Chinese influence along the Silk Road. Now, the founder of the Han Dynasty was a man right here called Lu. He was a former peasant. So under the Qin ruler, Lu really reduced taxes. He lighted punishment, and he gained support from a lot of the ordinary people in the kingdom. So he kept useful Qin systems while really creating a more stabilized popular government. So Emperor Wu Di was one of the most important Han rulers. So under his leadership, China expanded its territory, so they gained more land. Confucianism became the official state philosophy, and the Silk Road trade increased under his rule. Now, of course, like all kingdoms, the Han Dynasty came to an end. So several factors really contributed to it coming to an end. So it was a lot of government corruption, um, the wealth inequality. So like people weren't really making as much money as some people were making, and that was making them mad. There were a lot of heavy taxes, a lot of natural disasters, and even rebellion. So in about 220 CE, the Han Dynasty collapsed, and China entered a period known as the Three Kingdoms period. So in closing, the Shang established the kind of the foundation for how Chinese dynasties really went going forward. The Zhou dynasty introduced what's called the Mandate of Heaven. Remember, the Mandate of Heaven said, "I'm given the right by heaven to govern you, as long as I'm pretty much in good character." Confucianism stressed education, relationships, and moral leadership. Taoism emphasized being at one with nature and the balance of yin and yang. The Qin dynasty unified China and pretty much standardized everything. The Han Dynasty really created a golden age of innovation, trade, and Confucian government. And in the Silk Road, of course, it was a long trade route that connected China to the ever big world. So a lot of these things we see in these dynasties then, we are still using today as a kind of a model. So these developments really helped Chinese civilizations for thousands of years, and even still influence not just America but East Asia today.